Hey everyone, welcome to Terrariums 101. Today we're going to be talking about glass and the different types of glass containers you can use for your terrariums. So let's get started. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. As you can see, we have a various selection of glass containers in front of us here, but an important note is not all glass is created the same. We got mason jar, we got these clippy tops. Has a little gasket in the top, keeps it nice and airtight. We have these canister glasses. They also have a gasket in the top on the lid. We got a flower vase, massive wine glass, maybe? I don't know what this is. This is a little food storage thing. You can find this on Amazon. It's got this wood lid with a gasket in it, and this massive cookie jar. We also have this plastic jar that came out of the recycling bin. You know, it's always good to upcycle things, and we'll look over why you may or may not want to use one of these. So first off, let's take a look at this honey jar. One of the reasons you wouldn't want to use this is because it is textured, and it's going to greatly obstruct your view. It does have a clippy top. Is that what these are called, clippy tops? Like, I don't actually know, but either way, it does have one. These are really nice for having a sealed terrarium. They're very easy to maintain, and they're very easy to operate. But you'll see here, now that I've put an object within this container, it is highly obstructed. You can't even really tell what it is, so I don't suggest using textured containers. Now for the mason jar, everyone has one of these laying around in their home probably. They do actually make decent terrariums. The glass is textured, and I know I just said I don't like textured glass for terrariums, but it's very subtle, and it adds a little bit of, I don't want to say class, but it's got that country feel to it, and it kind of brings a bit of atmosphere with it. So obviously on this front face it is very obstructed, but you could always put this in the back. But now let's compare that mason jar to this larger canister jar. It is a thicker glass, and there is obviously no obstruction on the glass itself. So put a rock in, you can see the image pretty well. It's not being obstructed by anything. You will see that there's this seam that runs up along each side. You usually get this with storage containers that aren't, meant for holding flowers. It's meant for holding food. But if you put something in here a little bit more detailed, you can see that around the edges of the glass, it has this lensing effect that kind of distorts the image. But a nice feature of this is it has a glass lid, and it does have a gasket on it. It's going to provide a nice airtight seal. So let's compare that to this other one. There is no seam on this one. The glass is much thinner. Because of that, it's going to be a bit more vulnerable to breaking, but as long as you're not throwing rocks at it, it should be okay. You can sort of hear that. The difference between the mason jar and this one and this other glass. It is much thinner. It's a much cheaper glass, but oddly, it's a much clearer glass. The lensing effect around the edges are much less because the glass is so thin. And here's both of them side by side. You can sort of see the difference. I don't know how well that's coming through on the camera, but the one on the right here, the glass is not pure. There's a lot of impurities in the glass. It's kind of lumpy. Where the one on the left here, it's just crystal clear. There's no imperfections that you can see. You don't have that seam in the middle. It's not doing that lensing effect around the side. Now, because it is a thinner glass, it is more fragile. You need to be careful when pouring in your substrate or placing large rocks within. Another downside is the lid. It's a wooden lid. Yes, it does have a gasket. It does create that airtight seal, which is great for a sealed terrarium, but it doesn't allow light to come in from the top. Now, if that's a big deal, it's going to be very situational. If you have it facing a window, it's really not that big of a deal. If you have a light overhead, though, it is going to be a problem, right? That light's going to hit the top of the lid and not make its way into the plants. My personal preference is the glass lid. So, moving on to this big cookie jar. Now, the jar itself is awesome, right? It's a nice size. You could build quite the terrarium. The lid's decorative, it's nice. But the problem is with the impurities in this glass. As I move this around, you can see there's air bubbles. There's these tiny little just imperfections all over the glass. In the very center, it's not bad with a lensing effect, but as you get around the sides, and you can definitely tell in the background of this video that it's just a really bad distortion. And here it is on a macro lens, and you can see these imperfections way better. Is it a big deal? Not so much. The things in the center of the glass look fine. It's going to hold your plants just fine. But if you look at the differences between that large cookie jar and this other smoother, cheaper glass, it's almost night and day. And the story is pretty much the same as we move on here. This clippy top jar, it's a food canister. It's a thicker glass. It's not meant to be decorative. It doesn't mean it makes a bad terrarium. They make great terrariums. It's just that decorative glass, like this flower vase, it's much more clear. It's easier to see what's inside. But there's some trade-offs here, right? This vase doesn't have a lid. You're going to have to find some way to seal this off, whereas this clippy top jar here, it does. And matter of fact, it's built in and it's easy to operate. And here's your side-by-side comparison. If you want to take a look for yourself, you can see on the right there's a bit of that lensing around the edges of the glass where it's thicker, where the decorative glass being thinner doesn't have that problem. It's also much more clear looking in at the textures of the moss itself. Now, while I do recommend that you upcycle things that would otherwise end up in a landfill, would this make for a good terrarium? Let's take a look. Now, I can certainly say it has great clarity. You don't have a very large lensing effect around the side. It is very weak though. If you put something heavy in here and squeeze this hard enough, you may end up messing up the insides of your terrarium. I can say that this lid is not airtight. When I was washing it, water would easily just spill out of it. But is that really a big deal for a terrarium? No. If this is all you have, this is excellent. This will work just fine. You just have to be cognizant of the fact of what the container is, right? So this is another piece of decorative glass. It does have a high clarity to it. Not a lot of lensing effect around the sides of it. One of the problems though is it doesn't have a lid. However, voila, this lid fits on there. Looks a little silly, but it does work. These lids are IKEA lids. They sell them single by themselves for like $3 a piece. I actually think this piece of glass is going to make for a really fun terrarium, so make sure you stay tuned and check that out when it drops. So what do I not recommend? I don't recommend glass with a lot of texture on it. It's going to obstruct your view. You're not going to be able to see what's inside very well. Does that mean don't use them? No, it's personal preference. Use what you want, use what you like. I don't have a problem with it. I'm just trying to give you an idea of what to expect when you do use these things. This one in particular has a great lid. It would make for a neat little terrarium and would probably house the plants just fine. Now, I do recommend some of this cheaper glassware. This is actually a borosilicate glass, but I don't like these wooden lids. Wood is prone to molding. You could probably put an oil on it to help prevent that, but it also blocks out the light from the top. So if you have an overhead light, that is going to be a problem. If you put it in front of a window, it will probably be okay. The same goes for a cork. It's pretty similar. Now, for the clippy top jars that I've been calling them, the glass, though a little thicker and there's that lensing effect, I do really like these. I like the lids, I like the gasket. It's kind of an all-in-one terrarium package. The lid is see-through, you can put a light over the top of it and it'll go right in. And for the most part, the glass isn't obstructed. It's rather clear and it's going to be clear enough for a terrarium. Now for these canisters, I do really like these. It's hard to not recommend them. There are some impurities. There are these seams on the side, but I love the lid on the top. It's very slim. There's a large opening to get your hand down in. It's not the worst. It's obviously not the best glass, but I think it will make for a fine terrarium. Much like the lids, the jars themselves also come from IKEA, and they come in 2 different sizes, and this is the larger one. Now for this larger cookie jar, this is an Anchor Hocking jar. They make cookware canister jars like this. I don't recommend this. The impurities are way too high. The distortion is way too high. I believe this is a soda lime glass. It's something you'll want to stay away from just because it doesn't have the clarity that you would want in a terrarium. Will it hold your plants? Absolutely. Will you love looking at them? Probably not. Now, something we haven't talked about are aquariums. In this case, this is an Aqueon 3-gallon aquarium from Petco. It comes with these glass lids. It has this kind of acrylic back to it that you can cut out, run your wires, anything like that that you may need. It's obviously not completely sealed, but it does offer the best clarity of a terrarium, so to speak. And of course, you could use it for an aquarium as well. They are watertight, obviously. And aquariums come in varying levels of clarity. If you really want to get into detail with them, you can look at something like a low iron aquarium. The clarity of the glass is much better. I believe this is probably a tempered glass, which is fine. I do believe these make for great terrariums. They're cheap, especially when you can get them on sale. Usually Petco runs a 50% off sale every few months or so. Full price, it's not really worth it, but 50% off, I believe this would have costed about $25, which is pretty similar to what a couple of jars would cost. Well, that's all for today. Thanks for coming along. I hope you learned something. And if you think there's something else that people would like to know that I didn't mention, feel free to leave it in the comments and we'll spread the word and get it out to folks. And if you made it this far and you haven't liked and subscribed, please go ahead and do so. I'd greatly appreciate it. Thanks, everyone. See you on the flip side.